Boy, answer me when I speak to you. Judge Harold McKinley's voice thundered across the courtroom. His deep-set eyes narrowed in anger. The entire courtroom had fallen silent. The only sound was the judge's gavel slamming against the wooden bench, its echo bouncing off the walls. The quiet teenager standing before him, a young black boy in a wrinkled hoodie and faded jeans, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, looking at the floor, his hands in his pockets. The boy hadn't spoken a single word since he stepped into the courtroom. The judge, a stern-faced man with graying hair and a reputation for his no-nonsense attitude, had already lost his patience. "What's the matter? Can't you talk? Are you dumb?" Judge McKinley sneered, shaking his head. "I don't have all day for this nonsense." A few people in the courtroom chuckled quietly. The boy's attorney, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Reynolds, clenched her jaw. She wanted to speak up, but before she could, the boy finally lifted his head. And then he spoke. His voice was calm, clear, and precise. "Your Honor," he said, his eyes locking onto the judge's with an intensity that made the older man sit up straight. "I didn't speak because I was analyzing your questioning style. It's flawed." A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge's face twitched. "Excuse me?" The boy continued, his voice unwavering. "You have a habit of leading with rhetorical questions that don't require real answers. It's an intimidation tactic." He tilted his head slightly, studying the judge as if he were a subject in an experiment. "I was waiting for an actual question. Now that you've asked one, I'll answer." The judge blinked, clearly taken aback. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Who is this kid?" someone whispered. The judge's nostrils flared, his embarrassment visible. "Are you mocking me, boy?" he snapped. The teenager shook his head. "No, sir. I was just observing." Judge McKinley opened his mouth to reply. But for the first time in his long career, he had no words. He had underestimated the quiet black teen before him, and now he was starting to realize this boy was no ordinary kid. But who was he, and how had he ended up here? It all started 3 weeks ago in a small neighborhood on the east side of town. 13-year-old Malcolm Carter was known for two things: being quiet and always having a book in his hands. He wasn't like the other kids on his block. While they played basketball or rode their bikes up and down the street, Malcolm would sit on his front porch, flipping through pages of books most grown-ups wouldn't even understand. His mother, Lisa Carter, worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. His father had left when he was 6. That didn't bother Malcolm much. He had learned early on that the only person he could really count on was himself. But one day, everything changed. Malcolm was walking home from school when he saw something he shouldn't have. A black SUV parked outside a corner store. A man in a dark suit stepped out and exchanged a small package with another man wearing a hoodie. It was quick, too quick, but Malcolm saw everything. He ducked behind a trash bin and watched as the suited man climbed back into the SUV and drove away. The man in the hoodie looked around, then stuffed the package into his pocket and walked off in the opposite direction. Something about it felt wrong. Malcolm had read enough crime novels to know a drug deal when he saw one. He should have walked away, should have gone home. But curiosity got the best of him. Later that night, Malcolm did what he always did when he had a question. He researched. He pulled out his old laptop, one his mother had bought at a garage sale, and started looking up everything he could about the man in the suit. 2 hours later, he found him. Raymond Fisk, a local businessman with a clean record. Too clean. Malcolm had seen patterns like this before. He had spent years studying everything from behavioral psychology to financial fraud. And something about Fisk didn't add up. That's when he made the mistake. He hacked in a Fisk company database. It wasn't hard. Their security was weak, almost laughably so. Malcolm wasn't even trying to steal anything. Just wanted to look, to confirm his suspicions. But what he found made his stomach drop. There were transactions. Huge amounts of money being moved between shell companies, accounts disappearing overnight. And then there was a list of names. One of them was his school principal. The realization hit him like a truck. This wasn't just a businessman doing shady deals. This was a whole network, a system, and Malcolm had just stumbled into the middle of it. He quickly closed his laptop. His hands were shaking. He knew he had to tell someone. But who? If the principal was involved, then who else? His mother? No, she worked too much and didn't need the stress. The police? He wasn't sure who to trust. That's when he made his second mistake. He tried to leave a tip, anonymously. He sent an email to a journalist at the local newspaper, attaching screenshots of what he found. No name, no details, just proof. He thought he was careful. He thought no one could trace it back to him. He was wrong. 3 days later, there was a knock at his door. When Malcolm's mother answered, 2 officers stood outside. They weren't in uniform, but Malcolm knew. Something about them felt off. "Lisa Carter?" One of them asked. "Yes. We need to take your son in for questioning." Malcolm's heart dropped. His mother turned to him, confused. "Questioning? About what?" "It's just routine," the officer said smoothly. "We need to ask him a few things. He's not in trouble." But Malcolm saw the look in his eyes. He knew a lie when he heard one. Still, he didn't resist. He couldn't. His mother was watching, worried. And if he fought back, it would only make things worse. So, he went with them. And now, here he was, standing in front of a judge who thought he was just another troubled black kid who had gotten himself into trouble. But the judge didn't know the truth. Nobody did. Not yet. And before this was over, Malcolm would make sure they did. The judge cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "All right, smart guy. If you're so observant, then why don't you tell me this? Why are you here?" Malcolm took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the entire room pressing down on him. "I'm here," he said slowly, "because I know something I wasn't supposed to know." The judge's eyebrows furrowed. "And what exactly is that?" Malcolm hesitated. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him. The tension was thick. Then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, the doors burst open. A man in a black suit stormed in, his face pale with panic. He walked straight to the judge and whispered something in his ear. The judge's expression changed instantly. His face went stiff, his eyes widening slightly. Something was wrong, very wrong, and Malcolm knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The man in the black suit whispered urgently into Judge McKinley's ear, his hands clenched into fists. The judge's face, once filled with arrogance, was now pale and tense. He nodded stiffly, his gaze flicking toward Malcolm before quickly looking away. Something was wrong. Malcolm could feel it in the air. The man in the suit straightened up, cleared his throat, and glanced around the room. "Court is adjourned," he announced abruptly. Effective immediately, a wave of confusion spread through the courtroom. The spectators murmured among themselves. Malcolm's lawyer, Ms. Reynolds, turned to the judge with a frown. "Your Honor, what's going on? My client has the right to a fair hearing." "This hearing is over." Judge McKinley snapped, his usual confidence shaken. "Take the boy back." "Back where?" Malcolm wondered. 2 security officers moved toward him, but before they could grab his arms, he took a step back. "Wait," he said, keeping his voice even. "What just happened? Who is that man?" The man in the suit turned his head sharply toward Malcolm. His eyes were cold, calculating. "You don't need to know that," he said flatly. "Come with us." Ms. Reynolds stepped in front of Malcolm. "I want answers," she demanded. "What are the charges against my client?" The man hesitated. And then, without warning, the lights in the courtroom flickered. Then, darkness. A sharp pop echoed through the room, followed by the faint scent of burning wires. People gasped. Someone screamed. For a moment, everything was pitch black. Then, emergency backup lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows against the walls. Malcolm's heart pounded. This wasn't normal. Something was happening. And then, a gunshot rang out. Panic exploded in the courtroom. People scrambled, ducking beneath benches, rushing toward the exits. Malcolm barely had time to react before Ms. Reynolds grabbed his arm and yanked him down. "Stay low," she hissed. His ears were ringing, his pulse racing. He peeked over the bench just in time to see one of the security officers lying on the floor, motionless. The other had drawn his weapon, scanning the room wildly. The man in the suit was gone, vanished. Malcolm's mind worked fast. Whoever that man was, he had power. And someone had just tried to shut him up before he could do whatever he came here to do. This wasn't just about Malcolm anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. Ms. Reynolds pulled him toward the side exit, her breathing uneven. We need to get out of here. Malcolm hesitated. But now, Malcolm. He didn't argue. They slipped through the side door, rushing into the courthouse hallway. The sound of distant sirens filled the air. Ms. Reynolds led him down the corridor, past startled clerks and officers scrambling toward the chaos in the courtroom. She pulled out her phone, dialing frantically. "Who are you calling?" Malcolm asked as they hurried down a flight of stairs. "Someone who can help," she replied. She put the phone to her ear. "Detective Cole? It's me. We have a problem." Malcolm's stomach twisted. A problem? No. This was a disaster. 30 minutes later, Malcolm sat in the back seat of an old black sedan. It smelled faintly of coffee and cigarette smoke. Detective James Cole was behind the wheel, his sharp eyes flicking toward Malcolm through the rearview mirror. He was a grizzled man in his late 40s, with a 5 o'clock shadow and a permanent scowl. "Start talking, kid," he grunted. "What the hell did you do?" Malcolm frowned. "I didn't do anything." Detective Cole snorted. "Right? You just happened to end up in the middle of a shootout in a courthouse." "I didn't plan that," Malcolm said defensively. Ms. Reynolds, sitting in the front seat, rubbed her temples. "James, we don't have time for this. That wasn't random. Someone tried to shut that man up before he could say anything in court." The detective sighed, gripping the wheel tightly. "And you think it's related to Malcolm?" Ms. Reynolds shot Malcolm a knowing glance. "Yes, and I think Malcolm knows exactly why." Malcolm hesitated. He had a choice. He could lie. He could pretend he didn't know anything. Or he could tell them the truth. Malcolm took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Detective Cole didn't look surprised. "Figures," Malcolm continued. He told them about the black SUV, about Raymond Fisk, about hacking into the company's database. He explained the transactions, the shell companies, and the list of names, one of which was their school principal. When he finished, the car was silent. Ms. Reynolds exhaled slowly. "Jesus." Detective Cole shook his head. "Kid, do you have any idea who you just messed with?" Malcolm swallowed. "I was just trying to do the right thing." Cole let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, well, the right thing just put a target on your back." Malcolm's hands clenched into fists. "So what now? Do I just sit back and let them get away with it?" "No," Ms. Reynolds said firmly. "We're going to protect you." Cole muttered something under his breath before sighing. "Look, I'll make some calls, but we need to get somewhere safe. If these people are willing to kill in a courtroom, they won't hesitate to come after him anywhere else." Malcolm's mind raced. He had known this was dangerous, but he hadn't expected things to spiral this fast. Then his stomach dropped as a new realization hit him. His mother. "They know where I live," he whispered. Ms. Reynolds turned sharply. "What?" "They know where I live," Malcolm repeated, his voice rising. "If they're coming after me—" He didn't even finish the sentence. Detective Cole was already hitting the gas. The tires screeched as they sped down the darkened streets. Malcolm's heart pounded as the car weaved through traffic. Please, he thought. Please let her be okay. But deep down, he already knew. Something was waiting for him at home. Something bad. And when they arrived, the front door was wide open. The lights inside flickered. The living room was a mess, furniture overturned, papers scattered. And in the middle of it all, a single red envelope sat on the coffee table. Malcolm's blood ran cold. He stepped forward, his breath shaky. He reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 words. "We have her." Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. His fingers tightened around the red envelope, his hands shaking as he stared at the 3 words written in bold, black ink. "We have her." His mother was gone. His knees felt weak. His mind raced. No. No, no, no. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had been careful. He had been so careful. Ms. Reynolds grabbed the note from his hands, her face pale. "Oh my God!" Detective Cole didn't hesitate. He pulled out his gun, scanning the ransacked living room. "We're leaving. Now." Malcolm barely heard him. His heart was pounding too hard in his ears. His mother, his only family, had been taken because of him. He felt sick. "I should have known," he whispered, his hands clenching into fists. "I should have." "Kid, snap out of it," Cole barked, grabbing Malcolm by the shoulder. "You panicking won't get her back." Malcolm swallowed hard. forcing himself to breathe. What do we do? Cole's jaw tightened. First, we get out of here before they come back. He looked at Ms. Reynolds. Get the kid in the car. But Malcolm didn't move. His eyes were locked onto the note. There was something off. The paper was crisp, unwrinkled. The ink wasn't smudged. That meant it hadn't been left in a rush. Whoever took his mother had been careful. Precise. And then he noticed something else. A small number in the corner of the page. Number 47. His stomach twisted. That wasn't just any number. That was a reference code. A system. And if there was a system, there were more. Malcolm, let's go, Ms. Reynolds urged, tugging at his arm. But Malcolm was already moving. He rushed to the desk in the corner of the room, pulling open the bottom drawer where his old laptop was buried beneath a pile of school papers. What the hell are you doing? Cole demanded. I need 5 minutes, Malcolm muttered, setting up the laptop on the coffee table. His fingers flew over the keyboard. Cole swore. We don't have time for this. Give him a minute, Ms. Reynolds said, watching Malcolm closely. The detective exhaled sharply but kept his gun raised, scanning the windows. Malcolm's mind was working faster than ever. He had seen that number before, somewhere deep in the files he had hacked from Fisk's company. If he was right, this wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a transaction. He searched the old files, scrolling past rows and rows of numbers, bank transfers, and coded messages. Then, there, number 47, new asset secured. Awaiting transport. His blood ran cold. They weren't just holding his mother. They were moving her. Where? Ms. Reynolds asked, leaning over his shoulder. Malcolm's fingers danced across the keys. He searched for the most recent activity connected to the number. His eyes darted across the screen until he found it. A location. An old warehouse on the edge of town. Cole looked at the address and let out a heavy sigh. I know that place. It's abandoned. No security cameras. It's where people go to disappear. Malcolm shut the laptop, his jaw set. Then we go now. Cole narrowed his eyes. Kid, this isn't some movie. We don't just bust in there and grab her. Malcolm turned to face him. You don't have to go. But I'm going. Ms. Reynolds placed a hand on his shoulder. Malcolm, listen. No. Malcolm snapped, stepping back. This is my fault. I did this. I got her into this mess. His voice shook, but his eyes were steady. I have to fix it. Cole muttered another curse under his breath, rubbing his forehead. Damn it, kid. Then he sighed. Fine, he growled. But we do this my way. 15 minutes later, they were speeding down the highway. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by darkness. The warehouse was in an industrial zone, surrounded by miles of nothing but empty roads and abandoned buildings. Malcolm sat in the back seat, his knee bouncing. He was trying not to think about what could be happening to his mother right now. Was she scared? Was she hurt? No, he couldn't think like that. She was alive, and he was going to get her back. We go in quiet, Cole said as he drove. I'll handle the heavy stuff. You two stay back. I'm not staying back, Malcolm said firmly. Cole scowled. You don't have a choice. Malcolm clenched his fists. He didn't have a gun. He didn't have training. But he had his mind, and he had a plan. He just hoped it would work. The warehouse came into view. A massive, rusted structure, barely lit by a few flickering streetlights. A single black SUV was parked outside. Malcolm's stomach churned. That was the same SUV he had seen 3 weeks ago. Fisk's men were here. Cole pulled the car to a stop a safe distance away. He checked his gun and looked at them both. Stay put. Malcolm didn't answer. He just stared at the warehouse, his mind racing. Something didn't feel right. It was too quiet. Cole slipped out of the car, moving low and fast toward the building. He disappeared around the side, vanishing into the shadows. Ms. Reynolds turned to Malcolm. Stay here. Malcolm didn't respond. The second she turned her head, he slipped out of the car. She cursed under her breath. Malcolm. But he was already running. He reached the side of the warehouse, pressing his back against the cold metal. He could hear muffled voices inside. Then, a scream. His mother's voice. Malcolm's blood went ice cold. He didn't think. He moved. He found a rusted door slightly ajar and slipped inside. The air was thick with dust and oil. Dim lights flickered above. And then he saw her. His mother. Tied to a chair in the center of the room. her wrists bound, a bruise on her cheek. Her breathing was shaky, but she was alive. A tall man stood in front of her. Raymond Fisk. He held a phone in one hand, his face calm. "Yes," he said. "We have the boys' attention now." Malcolm's heart pounded. Fisk turned slightly, then froze. Their eyes met. Fisk smiled. "Well, that was faster than I expected." Malcolm didn't blink. "Let her go." Fisk chuckled, slipping the phone into his pocket. "You've been causing me a lot of trouble, kid." He nodded to one of his men, a large, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit. The man pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at Malcolm's head. Malcolm forced himself to stand tall, even as his pulse raced. "You're smart," Fisk continued. "You should have known how this was going to end." Malcolm's mind was spinning. The gun, the exits, the number of men. He was outnumbered, but he still had one advantage. Fisk didn't know about Cole. The detective was still out there, and Malcolm just had to buy enough time. He took a deep breath, and then he smiled. "You think this is over?" Malcolm said, his voice steady. "You're wrong." Fisk raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Malcolm tilted his head. "You should probably turn around." Fisk frowned. Then, boom, a gunshot rang out. One of Fisk's men dropped instantly. Then another. Chaos erupted, and Malcolm took his chance. He ran, straight for his mother. Malcolm sprinted toward his mother, his heart hammering in his chest. Gunshots rang through the warehouse, echoing off the steel walls. He barely registered the chaos behind him. His only focus was getting to her. His mother's eyes widened when she saw him. "Malcolm, no! Get out of here!" He didn't listen. His fingers fumbled with the ropes, binding her wrists, his breath shaky. "I got you, Mom. I got you." Behind him, Fisk was yelling orders. His remaining men scrambled for cover, returning fire at the unseen shooter. "Cole!" Malcolm worked faster. His mother's wrists were raw from the tight bindings, but he managed to untie them. She winced as she tried to move. "We have to go," he whispered urgently. She nodded weakly. "I can run." A bullet whizzed past them, hitting a crate nearby with a loud crack. Malcolm grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the nearest cover. Then, a firm grip yanked him back. A strong arm wrapped around his throat, pulling him away from his mother. He gasped, struggling, his feet barely touching the ground. One of Fisk's men had him. "No!" His mother lunged forward, but another thug blocked her path, shoving her back. Malcolm clawed at the thick forearm, crushing his windpipe. His vision blurred. His lungs burned. "Stop fighting, boy," the thug growled. "It's over." No, it wasn't. With the last bit of strength he had, Malcolm raised his foot and stomped down hard on the thug's instep. The man grunted in pain. His grip loosened just enough. Malcolm twisted, slamming his elbow into the thug's ribs. The man let go with a curse. Malcolm dropped to the ground, gasping for air. Then he saw it, a steel pipe. Without thinking, he grabbed it and swung with all his strength. Crack! The thug crumpled, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Malcolm didn't waste time. He grabbed his mother's hand again. "Run!" They dashed toward the warehouse exit, weaving between crates and overturned tables. More gunshots, shouting, footsteps. Cole was still out there, covering them, but Fisk wasn't running. He was standing still, calm in the middle of the chaos, watching Malcolm. And then he smiled. Malcolm's stomach turned. Something was wrong. Too late. The second they reached the exit, a dark figure stepped into the doorway, blocking their path. Malcolm skidded to a stop. His mother gripped his arm. A tall, lean man in a tailored suit stood before them, adjusting his cuffs. Unlike the other thugs, he didn't have a gun drawn. He didn't need one. His presence alone was terrifying. His cold, gray eyes locked onto Malcolm. Going somewhere? Malcolm's throat went dry. He knew who this was. Elias King, Fisk's enforcer. The one people whispered about but never saw. The one who made people disappear. And he was standing right in front of them. Malcolm barely had time to react before Elias moved. Fast. Too fast. His mother gasped as Elias grabbed Malcolm by the collar and slammed him against the wall. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through his back. "Malcolm," his mother screamed. Elias ignored her. He tilted his head slightly, studying Malcolm like he was a puzzle. "You're an interesting one," Elias murmured. "I've been watching you for a while." Malcolm clenched his jaw, refusing to look away. Elias smirked. "Not afraid? I don't have time to be afraid," Malcolm muttered. Elias chuckled. "Smart answer." Then, without warning, he pulled out a knife. A sleek, silver blade. Thin. Precise. He pressed the cold metal against Malcolm's cheek, just enough to let him feel it. Malcolm held his breath. "You've caused a lot of trouble," Elias said softly. "More than a kid your age should be capable of." Malcolm's mind raced. He needed a way out. He needed a gunshot. Elias flinched. Malcolm took his chance. He grabbed Elias's wrist, twisted it sharply, and ducked out of his grip. The knife clattered to the floor. His mother was already moving. She grabbed a nearby metal rod and swung it like a baseball bat. Wham! The rod connected with Elias's ribs. The enforcer grunted, but barely stumbled. He turned his cold eyes on her, lips curling in amusement. "That was cute." Malcolm didn't wait. He grabbed his mother's hand. And then, the back wall exploded. A massive force shook the warehouse, sending dust and debris flying. The impact knocked them both to the ground. For a moment, everything was a blur. Ears ringing, vision spinning. Then, Malcolm heard a voice. "Get up, kids! Cole!" Malcolm blinked, dazed, as the detective stormed through the wreckage. He had blown open the back wall. Cole fired 2 shots toward Elias, forcing him to step back. Then he grabbed Malcolm and his mother by the arms, hauling them up. "We're leaving." Malcolm didn't argue. They ran, out the back of the warehouse, into the open night air. Malcolm's lungs burned as they sprinted across the dirt lot. Footsteps thundered behind them. Fisk's men were chasing them. Cole yanked open the door of an abandoned truck. "Get in." Malcolm shoved his mother inside first. He jumped in after her. Cole barely had time to slam the door shut before bullets pinged against the side of the truck. The detective floored the gas. Tires screeched. The truck lurched forward, kicking up dust as they tore down the road. Malcolm twisted in his seat, looking back. Through the shattered warehouse, he could still see Fisk. Still standing. Still watching. Then, Elias King stepped beside him. The enforcer locked eyes with Malcolm and smiled. The kind of smile that said, "This isn't over." Malcolm turned back around, his breathing heavy. His mother was safe. For now. But he knew the truth. This wasn't just about him anymore. Fisk, Elias King, the entire operation. They weren't going to stop. Which meant, neither could he. The truck sped down the dark, empty road, the city lights fading in the distance. Malcolm's breath was uneven. His mother sat beside him, her hands trembling as she clutched her bruised wrists. Cole's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. "We're not out of the woods yet, kid." Malcolm turned, looking out the rear window. No headlights. No cars chasing them. But he knew better. They weren't safe. Not yet. His mother let out a shaky breath. "Malcolm, what is going on?" Malcolm opened his mouth, but no words came. Where would he even start? That he had uncovered a criminal operation bigger than anyone realized? That the people after him weren't just thugs, but professionals, killers? That the man who had held a knife to his face wasn't finished with him? Cole glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You better tell her, kid. She deserves to know." Malcolm swallowed hard. He took a deep breath, and he told her everything. About the drug deal he saw, about hacking into Fisk's company, about the hidden transactions and the list of names, about how he had tried to expose it, only to get dragged into something far worse. His mother didn't say a word. She just stared at him, her face pale, her eyes full of something between fear and disbelief. When he finished, she exhaled, long and slow. "So you mean to tell me my son hacked into a crime lord's accounts?" Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. "Technically, yes." She shook her head. "Malcolm, I worked 2 jobs to keep you out of trouble. And you," she let out a bitter laugh. "You go and pick a fight with criminals?" "I wasn't trying to pick a fight," Malcolm mumbled. I had to do something." She closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. "And now they kidnapped me. Malcolm, do you understand how dangerous these people are?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Her eyes softened. You're just a kid. He clenched his fists. I was just a kid. Not anymore. Silence filled the truck. Cole let out a grunt. All right. Enough with the emotional moment. We have a bigger problem. Malcolm looked at him. What? Cole's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. We got company. Malcolm twisted in his seat. Headlights. Two black SUVs in the distance, closing in fast. Fisk's men. His mother's breath hitched. Oh, God. Malcolm's pulse pounded. They must have put a tracker on the truck, Cole muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Malcolm's mind raced. Can we outrun them? Cole's jaw tightened. Not for long. The SUVs were gaining. Malcolm's stomach twisted. If they got caught now, it was over. Fisk wouldn't just take them back. He would make sure Malcolm didn't get another chance to run. His mother, Ms. Reynolds, Cole, none of them would be safe. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists. No, not again. He wasn't going to let them win. He turned back to Cole. Take the next exit. Cole frowned. That leads into the woods. Nowhere to go. Exactly. Cole hesitated, then swore under his breath. Fine. He yanked the wheel hard to the right. The truck veered off the main road onto a smaller, winding path leading into the forest. The SUVs followed. Dust and gravel kicked up behind them. The headlights of their pursuers flickered through the trees. Malcolm's mind was already working, scanning the surroundings. They needed an advantage. Something. Anything. Then he saw it. A construction site up ahead. Large cement pipes stacked beside an unfinished bridge. Malcolm's brain calculated the angles. The timing. They had one shot. Cole, when I say, turn hard left. The detective didn't argue. The SUVs closed in. The lead vehicle was almost at their bumper. Malcolm counted the seconds in his head. 3, 2, 1. Now! Cole yanked the wheel left. The truck veered sharply, narrowly missing the stack of cement pipes. The first SUV wasn't so lucky. It crashed hard, slamming into the pipes with a sickening crunch. The heavy cylinders collapsed onto the hood, crushing the front of the vehicle instantly. The second SUV swerved, barely avoiding the wreckage. But it was still coming. Cole cursed. That didn't stop them all. Malcolm was already moving. He threw open the glove compartment, searching. Do you have a gun? Yeah, but you're not using it. Malcolm ignored him, grabbing a small metal object instead. A flare. Perfect. He turned to his mother. Take the wheel? Her eyes widened. What? No. I don't know how to drive like this. You just have to keep it straight. Before she could argue, Malcolm climbed into the truck bed. The wind whipped against his face. His fingers fumbled with the flare. The second SUV was right there. Almost on them, Malcolm took a deep breath. Then, he lit the flare and threw it. The burning red stick arced through the air and landed right on the SUV's windshield. The driver panicked. The vehicle swerved wildly. Then, the SUV hit a pothole. It flipped. Malcolm barely had time to brace himself as the explosion lit up the night sky. The shockwave rocked the truck. Cole gritted his teeth, keeping them steady. Then, silence. No more headlights. No more SUVs. Malcolm let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. They had won. For now. Half an hour later, the truck pulled into an old gas station on the outskirts of town. It was abandoned, the lights flickering weakly. Cole parked behind the building. He exhaled, rubbing his face. All right, we need a plan. Malcolm hopped out of the truck, still shaking. His mother followed, wrapping her arms around herself. Ms. Reynolds leaned against the door. We can't keep running forever. No, Cole agreed. We can't. Malcolm's mind was still racing. Fisk wouldn't stop. Elias King wouldn't stop. They needed to go on the offensive. And Malcolm knew how. He turned to Ms. Reynolds. You still have connections at the newspaper? She frowned. Why? Malcolm's eyes darkened. Because I'm done hiding? Cole raised an eyebrow. You have an idea? Malcolm nodded. I'm going to take Fisk down. His mother gasped. Malcolm. I have all the proof, Malcolm said, his voice steady. The files. The transactions. The evidence. Cole's expression turned serious. That won't be enough. Fisk owns half the city. You need more than just documents. Malcolm smirked. I know. He took a deep breath. We're going to make him confess. Silence. Then, Cole chuckled. You really are insane, kid. Malcolm grinned. I know. The gas station was silent except for the occasional flickering of the old neon sign above them. The night air was thick with tension. Malcolm's mind raced as he pieced together his plan. Fisk was too powerful to be taken down by documents alone. He had politicians in his pocket, cops under his payroll. If they took their evidence to the police, it would be buried before it ever reached the courtroom. They needed something undeniable. A confession. Ms. Reynolds shook her head. Malcolm, Fisk is not stupid. You think you can just walk up to him and make him confess? Malcolm's eyes darkened. No, but I can make him think he's already caught. Cole rubbed his chin. You got a plan, genius? Malcolm exhaled. Yeah, but I need your help. Cole crossed his arms. Let's hear it. Malcolm turned to Ms. Reynolds. You said you still know reporters, right? She nodded slowly. Good, Malcolm said, because we're going to make it look like the walls are closing in on Fisk. Ms. Reynolds frowned. What do you mean? We leak everything, Malcolm said. The files, the transactions, the names. We send it to every journalist, news station, and media outlet we can find. His mother gasped. Malcolm, won't that make us even bigger targets? Yes, Malcolm admitted. But it'll also put the pressure on him. Fisk thrives in the shadows. If he thinks his operation is being exposed, he'll panic. He'll make mistakes. Cole nodded slowly. That's smart, but it still doesn't get us a confession. Malcolm smirked. That's the second part of the plan. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the files he had stolen from Fisk's database. He tapped on a folder labeled Private Meetings. It was filled with voice recordings. Malcolm had found them weeks ago, but never had time to go through all of them. If Fisk was paranoid enough to record his own meetings, there had to be something useful in there. Ms. Reynolds peered over his shoulder. Wait, are these his recordings? Malcolm nodded. She blinked. You hacked into his private files? Yes. Cole let out a low whistle. Kid, remind me never to make you mad. Malcolm scrolled quickly through the recordings, looking for keywords. Transactions. Shipments. Blackmail. Then, his eyes widened. He tapped on a file. Meeting _47. The number 47. The same one that had been on his mother's ransom note. His stomach twisted. He hit play. A voice crackled through the speaker. Fisk's voice. We'll move the assets by Friday. Make sure the authorities don't catch wind of it. Then, another voice. One Malcolm recognized instantly. The principal. His mother's eyes widened. Oh my God. The voice continued. Fisk, I can't keep covering for you. If this gets out, Fisk cut him off. It won't, unless you want your name on a police report. The principal hesitated. You wouldn't? Fisk chuckled. I don't make threats. I make promises. Silence. Then the recording ended. Malcolm's hands shook as he gripped the phone. This was it. Proof that the principal was working with Fisk. And more importantly, proof that Fisk was blackmailing people to keep them in line. Malcolm looked at Cole. You wanted more than documents? This is it? Cole's lips curled into a smirk. That'll rattle him, all right. But we still need to get him to say something worse. Malcolm's brain worked fast. What if we make him think the principal is turning on him? Ms. Reynolds narrowed her eyes. Explain? Malcolm's smirk grew. We fake a betrayal. His mother's eyes widened. Malcolm, that's dangerous. I know, Malcolm admitted. But it's the only way. Cole leaned back. How do we do it? Malcolm exhaled. We make it look like the principal is cutting a deal with the cops. We send Fisk a fake message from the principal. Something that makes him think he's being double-crossed. Ms. Reynolds rubbed her temples. Malcolm, if Fisk thinks someone is turning on him, he'll kill them. Malcolm nodded. That's why we have to control the situation. We need Fisk to confront the principal himself. Cole raised an eyebrow. You want them in the same place? Yes, Malcolm said. Because when they meet, we'll be listening. Cole grinned. You want to bug the place? Malcolm nodded. We plan a wire. We make Fisk admit everything. Ms. Reynolds looked uneasy. This is risky. Malcolm met her gaze. So is waiting for them to come after us again. Silence. Then his mother sighed. We're really doing this, aren't we? Cole smirked. Kid's got a point. Ms. Reynolds exhaled. All right, let's get to work. The plan was set in motion within hours. Cole made some calls, pulling in favors from his old contacts. Ms. Reynolds worked on crafting the fake message to send to Fisk, making it look like the principal was turning on him. Malcolm worked on the wire. They had one shot, one mistake, and Fisk would know it was a trap. By morning, everything was in place. The message was sent, and Fisk took the bait. That night, Malcolm sat inside a parked car across from an abandoned motel. A small earpiece was tucked in his ear, feeding him audio from the wire they had planted inside. Inside the motel, the principal sat at a wobbly table, waiting. He didn't know this was a setup. He thought he was meeting someone else. Instead, the door creaked open. Fisk walked in. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. The principal tensed. Raymond, listen, Fisk slammed the door shut. You really thought I wouldn't find out? The principal swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean. Fisk's voice dropped dangerously low. You sold me out. The principal's voice trembled. No, I would never. Fisk's footsteps echoed as he moved closer. You want to know what happens to traitors? Fisk asked. Malcolm's fingers dug into his knees. Come on, say it. Fisk let out a low chuckle. I kill them. Malcolm's heart stopped. They had him. Everything was being recorded. They had the confession. Cole's voice crackled in Malcolm's earpiece. That's it. We got him. Malcolm exhaled shakily. Fisk was going down. But then, a sound in the earpiece made his blood turn to ice. Another voice. Cold. Amused. Elias King. You didn't really think we'd fall for this, did you? Malcolm's stomach dropped. Then static. The wire went dead. His blood ran cold. Fisk had known. They had walked into a trap. Malcolm turned to Cole, panic rising in his chest. We have to go. Now. Cole didn't hesitate. He floored the gas. They had to get there before it was too late. Because if Elias was there, someone was going to die. The car tore down the empty road, headlights slicing through the darkness. Malcolm's pulse was a drumbeat in his ears. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. Elias King had been waiting for them. They had walked straight into a trap. Cole's jaw was set as he sped toward the motel. Ms. Reynolds sat in the back seat, gripping her phone tightly. We lost the wire, she said. No signal. Malcolm exhaled sharply. That's because Fisk knew. He knew we were recording him. Cole cursed under his breath. Which means he's going to make an example out of the principal. Malcolm's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about getting a confession anymore. Now it was about saving a man's life. The tires screeched as Cole swerved onto the motel's gravel lot. The building was dark, its neon sign flickering weakly. Cole killed the engine. All right, we go in quiet. Malcolm was already unbuckling his seatbelt. Cole shot him a look. And you stay in the car? No. Cole's glare hardened. Kid, I got us into this. Malcolm cut him off. I'm seeing it through. Cole exhaled. Fine, but you stay behind me. Malcolm nodded. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the side entrance. Cole tested the handle. Unlocked. His gun was already drawn. Ms. Reynolds stayed behind, keeping lookout. Malcolm took a breath. His heart pounded as Cole pushed the door open. They slipped inside. The air was thick, stale, and then they heard it. A voice. Low. Smooth. Elias. I have to admit, Elias said, I expected better from Fisk's so-called trusted men. They crept closer, pressing against the wall, peering into the dimly lit room. The principal was on his knees. Fisk stood in front of him, arms crossed. Elias was behind them, leaning against the wall, casually inspecting a knife. Fisk's voice was sharp. I don't like traitors. The principal shook his head frantically. I swear, I didn't betray you. Fisk tilted his head. Then explain why the cops are sniffing around. I don't know. Elias smirked. Lying isn't going to save you. He took a step forward, spinning the knife in his fingers. The principal flinched. Malcolm's breath caught. They were going to kill him. He turned to Cole, whispering, We have to stop them. Cole's grip on his gun tightened. Too many of them. Malcolm's mind raced. They couldn't just storm in. Fisk's men would gun them down in seconds. They needed a distraction. And Malcolm had an idea. He pulled out his phone, typed quickly, sent a message. Then, he turned the volume all the way up and hit play. Fisk's voice filled the air. You want to know what happens to traitors? I kill them. A recording, the same one from earlier, blasting through the speaker. The room froze. Fisk's eyes snapped to the doorway. What the? Then, the motel's emergency fire alarm went off. A piercing screech. Chaos erupted. The principal scrambled back. Fisk and Elias spun around, looking for the source of the sound. That was their chance. Cole moved first. Bang! A single gunshot. Fisk's men ducked for cover. Malcolm grabbed the principal, pulling him toward the door. Move! Elias's voice rang out. Get them! Footsteps thundered behind them. They ran. Cole covered them, firing warning shots. They burst out of the motel, into the night. The principal gasped for air. I thought I was dead. Malcolm shoved him toward the car. Not yet. Ms. Reynolds yanked the back door open. Get in. The principal dove inside. Malcolm followed. Then, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Cold, ironclad, yanked him back. Malcolm's breath hitched. Elias, standing behind him, smirking. You're starting to be a real problem, Elias said smoothly. Malcolm's stomach dropped. He tried to move. Too late. Elias twisted his arm. Sharp pain shot through his wrist. Malcolm shouted. Then, Elias pressed the knife against his side. I could end this right now, Elias murmured. Malcolm froze. His mind screamed for a way out. But then, Cole's voice. Let him go. Elias sighed. Detective, Cole's gun was leveled at Elias's head. The two men stared each other down. Elias tilted his head. You sure you want to do this? Cole didn't blink. Malcolm's breathing was shallow. The knife was still pressed against his ribs. Then, Elias smirked. And let go. Malcolm stumbled back, gasping. Elias stepped away, pocketing the knife like nothing happened. This isn't over. Cole pulled Malcolm toward the car. They didn't wait. They sped off into the night. 15 minutes later, they pulled into a safe house, an old garage Cole had set up as a hideout. The principal collapsed onto a chair, still shaking. I don't understand. Why did they think I was betraying them? Malcolm exhaled. Because we made them think you were. The principal's head snapped up. What? Cole leaned against the wall. We needed Fisk to confess. So we tricked him. The principal's face paled. You used me as bait? Malcolm hesitated. Yes. The man swallowed hard. You don't understand. Fisk isn't just some criminal. He owns this city. His voice shook. And now, he's going to come after all of us? Malcolm's mother sat beside him. Then we take him down first. The principal let out a hollow laugh. And how do you plan to do that? Malcolm clenched his jaw. He met Cole's gaze. Then he said the words that sealed his fate. We bring the fight to him. The garage was silent. The only sound was the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe in the corner. Everyone stared at Malcolm like he had lost his mind. We bring the fight to him, Malcolm repeated, his voice steady. Cole let out a dry laugh. You want to take on Fisk? Kid, you got guts, but that's suicide. The principal shook his head furiously. You don't get it? Fisk isn't some low-level crook. He owns politicians, police, judges. You don't fight someone like him. You run. Malcolm's mother crossed her arms. We already tried running. The principal looked at her like she had gone crazy too. Then keep running. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists. No, I'm done running. Fisk has spent years scaring people into silence. He expects us to back down. Cole sighed, rubbing his forehead. And what? You think you can outsmart him? Malcolm's jaw tightened. Yes. Silence. Cole studied him for a long moment. Then, with a shake of his head, he muttered, You're insane. Malcolm smirked. I get that a lot. The principal let out a humorless laugh. Even if we did go after Fisk, how? You think we just waltz in his office and say, Hey, we got you on tape, now confess? No, Malcolm said. We make him walk into a trap. Cole raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Malcolm's mind was already racing. Every puzzle had a solution. And right now, Fisk was the biggest puzzle of all. We have two things Fisk doesn't know yet, Malcolm said. One, He thinks the wire is destroyed. He doesn't know we still have the recording. Ms. Reynolds' eyes widened. Wait, do we? Malcolm nodded, pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen, and Fisk's voice played again. You want to know what happens to traitors? I kill them. The principal swallowed hard. That's pretty damning. Cole crossed his arms. And what's the second thing? Malcolm's smirk widened. The principal is still alive. The older man paled. Oh, great. So now I'm bait again. Malcolm ignored him. Fisk thinks he cleaned up his mess tonight. But what if he gets a message from you? The principal's eyes widened. No. Nope. Absolutely not. Malcolm continued, unfazed. A message saying you escaped. That you have proof. And that you want to cut a real deal to save yourself. Cole exhaled. You want to make Fisk panic. Malcolm nodded. If he thinks the principal is about to flip, he won't wait. He'll come after him himself. Ms. Reynolds' brow furrowed. And when he does? Malcolm's grin turned sharp. We catch him? The principal threw his hands in the air. Catch him? With what? A net? No, Malcolm said. With live coverage? Ms. Reynolds' eyes widened. Oh. Cole chuckled. I see where you're going with this. Malcolm's heart pounded with excitement. We set up a meeting, somewhere public, somewhere Fisk thinks he'll be able to take care of the problem quietly. Ms. Reynolds nodded. And we make sure the press is watching? Exactly, Malcolm said. We stream it. Live. No time for Fisk to silence anyone. The second he says anything incriminating, the whole city sees it. The principal groaned. This is insane. Cole smirked. Yeah, but it might just work. The principal pointed at Malcolm. If I die, I'm haunting you. Malcolm grinned. Noted. The next night, everything was in place. The meeting was set at an abandoned train yard. Quiet. Isolated. The kind of place Fisk would pick for a discreet execution. Only this time, he was the one walking into a trap. Hidden cameras had been placed at key locations. Ms. Reynolds had called in a trusted journalist to ensure the footage was being broadcasted live. Cole was watching from a rooftop, his sniper rifle trained on the meeting spot. If things go south, he said through the earpiece, we pull the plug and get the hell out. Malcolm sat beside Ms. Reynolds in a nearby van, watching the feed. Copy that? The principal stood alone in the middle of the yard, pacing. I hate this. I really hate this. Just stick to the script, Malcolm said. Tell Fisk you have evidence and you're willing to deal. Make him talk. The principal groaned. I'm going to die. I know I'm going to die. Then, headlights appeared in the distance. A black SUV rolled onto the train yard. Malcolm's breath hitched. It was time. The SUV stopped. The doors opened. Fisk stepped out first. Then, Elias. Malcolm's stomach twisted. Elias King. Again. The enforcer's cold gray eyes scanned the yard. He smirked. Fisk adjusted his cufflinks. You have 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't kill you. The principal swallowed hard. I have proof. Fisk raised an eyebrow. Proof of what? The principal glanced nervously toward one of the hidden cameras. Everything. The payments. The blackmail. The bodies. Malcolm's fingers tightened around the headset. Come on. Say something incriminating. Fisk scoffed. And you think you can just negotiate with me? The principal stammered. Then, Elias pulled out his gun. Malcolm's heart stopped. Elias pointed it at the principal's head. You're lying. Malcolm's mother grabbed his arm. Malcolm, do something. Panic surged through him. They needed Fisk to talk. If Elias pulled the trigger, this was over. Then an idea struck him. A crazy idea. Malcolm grabbed his phone and called Fisk. Fisk frowned when his phone rang. He pulled it out. Who the hell? Then he saw the name. Malcolm Carter. His expression froze. Elias glanced at the phone. What is it? Fisk answered. Who is this? Malcolm took a deep breath. Then, through the live broadcast, he said, Smile, Fisk. You're on camera? Fisk's face dropped. He spun, eyes scanning the yard, looking for the cameras. The principal bolted. Elias raised his gun. Bang! A shot rang out. Elias jerked back, his gun flying from his hand. Cole's voice crackled in the earpiece. Told you I had your back. Malcolm exhaled. Fisk's men panicked. They scrambled back to the SUV. But it was too late. Because now, the police were pulling up. Sirens blared. Lights flashed. And on every TV, phone, and news channel in the city, Fisk's stunned face was live. Caught. Cornered. Malcolm's lips curled into a smirk. Checkmate. The blaring sirens echoed through the train yard, red and blue lights flooding the scene. The police swarmed in, surrounding the SUV. Fisk's face was frozen in shock, his mind racing. He had walked into a setup. A public setup. The entire city had seen everything. Cops, reporters, cameras. There was no escape. Malcolm sat in the van, his breath shallow as he watched it all unfold on the screen. His hands were still shaking from adrenaline. "We did it," Ms. Reynolds whispered. Cole's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Not yet. This isn't over." Malcolm clenched his fists. He knew Cole was right. Fisk wasn't just going to surrender quietly. And then, Elias King moved, faster than anyone expected. 1 second, he was standing beside Fisk. The next, he had a gun pressed to the principal's head. The train yard fell silent. The cops hesitated. Guns were drawn, but no one fired. Malcolm's heart stopped. Elias smirked. Well, this got interesting." The principal whimpered, frozen in terror. Fisk straightened his jacket, his confidence returning. "Looks like we still have a bargaining chip." Malcolm's stomach twisted. Fisk turned toward the nearest police officer, smiling. "How about a deal? You let us walk." He gestured to Elias and the principal. "And he lives?" The lead officer hesitated. The cameras were still rolling. The world was watching. They couldn't just shoot Elias. Not while he had a hostage. Malcolm knew what Fisk was doing. He was buying time, looking for a way out. They needed to act now. Malcolm yanked his headset back on. "Cole, do you have a shot?" Cole's voice was grim. "Not without hitting the principal." Malcolm's brain worked overtime. There had to be something, some way to break the stalemate. Then he saw it, a stack of rusted train carts behind Fisk. Malcolm's mind raced. The carts were old, barely held up by weak supports. One good hit, and they'd collapse. Malcolm's hands flew over the control panel. He pulled up the train yard's emergency override system. If he could activate the release mechanism, the carts would drop right behind Fisk and Elias. A distraction. That was all they needed. He hacked into the system in seconds. Found the override. One press of a button, and everything would change. He took a breath and hit enter. The ground rumbled. A loud clank echoed through the train yard. Fisk's eyes darted up. Elias's smirk faltered. Then, the rusted train carts collapsed. Metal screeched as they came crashing down. Elias flinched just for a second. That was all Cole needed. Bang! A single, precise shot. The bullet slammed into Elias's wrist. His gun dropped. The principal bolted. Everything happened at once. The cops rushed in. Elias clutched his bleeding wrist, gritting his teeth. Fisk ran, but there was nowhere to go. A dozen cops tackled him to the ground. Malcolm exhaled, his entire body shaking. It was over. Fisk was pinned, his face pressed against the dirt, his hands cuffed behind his back. Elias, still clutching his wounded arm, stared at Malcolm from across the train yard. And then, he smiled. A slow, knowing smile, like he knew something. Malcolm's stomach twisted. Why was he smiling? Then, Elias laughed. Malcolm's pulse quickened. Cole's voice came through the earpiece. Something's wrong. Malcolm's mind raced. Fisk was caught. Elias was down. The plan worked. So why? Then it hit him, like a slap to the face. Fisk wasn't the top. He was just a piece. A puppet. And Elias. Elias wasn't panicking. He was amused. Like he knew this wasn't the end. Like he was waiting. For something. Someone. And then, Malcolm's phone buzzed. A new message. No name. No number. Just 3 words. You made enemies. Malcolm's blood ran cold. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Malcolm stared at the message, his stomach twisting into knots. You made enemies. 3 words. Simple. Direct. And a warning. His hands trembled as he gripped the phone. Cole's voice crackled through the earpiece. Kid? What's wrong? Malcolm swallowed hard. I just got a message. Cole frowned. From who? Malcolm hesitated. I don't know. Cole cursed under his breath. Let me guess. It wasn't Fisk. Malcolm shook his head, his mind racing. Fisk was in cuffs. His operation was crumbling. So who else was watching? Then he turned. Elias King was still smirking, still calm, even as the cops shoved him into a squad car. He knew something, and Malcolm hated that. The feeling that there was still another layer, another secret, another threat. Ms. Reynolds approached, her face pale. "Malcolm? Are you okay?" Malcolm forced himself to nod. "Yeah." His mother stepped beside him, gripping his arm. "Baby, what's going on?" Malcolm took a deep breath. I think Fisk wasn't the biggest threat." Cole exhaled. "Yeah, kid. That's usually how it goes." Malcolm's mind raced. The message. The timing. The way Elias had smiled. This wasn't over. Not even close. That night, they relocated to a different safe house. An old, run-down apartment Cole used for hiding witnesses. The walls were thin. The air smelled like dust and cigarette smoke. But it was safe. For now. Malcolm sat on the floor, cross-legged, his laptop balanced on his knees. His mother was on the couch, watching him with worried eyes. Ms. Reynolds stood near the window, peering through the blinds every few minutes. Cole leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "All right, genius. What now?" Malcolm sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know." Cole scoffed. "That's a first." Malcolm ignored him. His mind was spinning. Who sent that message? The police had Fisk. His men were being arrested. So, who is still out there? Ms. Reynolds spoke up. "Maybe it's someone trying to warn you." Malcolm frowned. "Or someone threatening me?" Cole pulled out his phone. "I'll run a trace. See if I can find where it came from." Malcolm exhaled. "Thanks." His mother sat forward, her expression serious. "Malcolm, you can walk away from this, you know." Malcolm looked at her. "What?" She swallowed. "Fisk is gone. You did it. You won. Maybe now's the time to stop." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Stop? After everything? After nearly getting killed? After being hunted? After realizing that someone bigger was out there?" "No," he said quietly. "I can't." His mother's face fell. "Malcolm, please," she whispered. "You're just a boy." He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He clenched them into fists. "No, I'm not." Silence. Then, Cole's phone beeped. Everyone turned. Cole frowned at the screen. "Oh, hell?" Malcolm's stomach dropped. "What?" Cole looked up. His face was grim. "The number that texted you?" Malcolm nodded slowly. "Yeah." Cole exhaled sharply. It was pinged from inside a police station. Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. "What?" Cole showed him the screen. It was sent after Fisk got arrested. Ms. Reynolds paled. "You're saying it came from inside?" Cole nodded. "Yeah." Malcolm's mind spun. Someone inside the system was watching. Someone with power. His hands felt cold. His throat was dry. This wasn't just about Fisk anymore. There were people above him. People who weren't done playing. His stomach twisted. And then, his phone buzzed again. A new message. This time a location. A set of coordinates. Malcolm's heart pounded. He looked at Cole. "Trace it." Cole didn't argue. He typed quickly, running the coordinates through the database. Then his face hardened. "Kid, this isn't good." Malcolm's pulse raced. "Where is it?" Cole looked up. An abandoned bank. Malcolm swallowed. And Cole hesitated. Then, he turned the screen toward them. Malcolm's blood ran cold. Because on the screen was a live video feed. Inside the abandoned bank. A single chair. A man tied up. Beaten. Bloodied. And Malcolm knew that face. It was the lead detective from Fisk's case. The one in charge of his arrest. And then, a figure stepped into frame. Malcolm's breath caught. The man was tall, dressed in an expensive suit, but his face was hidden. He held something up to the camera. A note. 3 words. "Come alone, genius." The feed cut out. The room was dead silent. Malcolm's mother covered her mouth, her eyes filling with terror. Ms. Reynolds whispered, "This is a trap." Cole cursed under his breath. "We are not going." Malcolm's stomach twisted. They had someone on the inside. And now, they were making their move. Fisk was never the end. He was just the beginning. Malcolm looked at the black screen of his phone. At those 3 words, "Come alone, genius." He exhaled. And then, he stood up. His mother's eyes widened. "Malcolm, no. I have to." Ms. Reynolds shook her head. You're not going alone? Cole clenched his jaw. Kid, this is suicide. Malcolm's chest tightened. Maybe, but this was the only way. He took a deep breath and whispered, I have a plan. The room was dead silent. Malcolm's mother shook her head, gripping his arm. No, absolutely not. Malcolm swallowed hard, his pulse racing. Mom, she squeezed tighter. You are not walking into a trap. Cole rubbed his temples. Kid, I hate to agree with your mom, but this is insane. Malcolm clenched his fists. He knew it was dangerous. He knew this was exactly what they wanted. But they had a hostage. And whoever they weren't bluffing. Ms. Reynolds spoke up. Malcolm, think this through. We don't even know who we're up against. Malcolm exhaled sharply. That's exactly why I have to go. Cole narrowed his eyes. Explain? Malcolm pulled out his phone, bringing up the coordinates again. They picked this spot for a reason. They could have grabbed me at any time, but they didn't. Instead, they sent an invitation. His mother's voice was tight with fear. Because they want you to come? Malcolm nodded. Which means they need me alive. At least for now. Cole frowned. That doesn't mean they won't kill you after they get what they want. Malcolm took a deep breath. That's why I'm going in prepared. Ms. Reynolds folded her arms. You have a plan? Malcolm's gaze hardened. I'm going to walk into that bank. Cole scoffed. And then what? Ask nicely for them to let the guy go. No, Malcolm said. I'm going to make them think I'm the most dangerous person in the room. Silence. Ms. Reynolds blinked. Okay, I'm going to need you to explain that one. Malcolm sat forward. His mind was moving fast, piecing everything together. This isn't just about me, he said. They know what I did to Fisk. They know I outplayed him. That means they're curious. Cole nodded. Go on. Malcolm tapped the screen of his laptop. Whoever these people are, they don't just want to kill me. If they did, I'd already be dead. They want something else? Ms. Reynolds frowned. Like what? Malcolm's voice was quiet. They want to know what else I know? His mother's face paled. Cole muttered a curse. You think they're testing you? Yes. Malcolm's throat was dry. And if I pass? Cole's expression darkened. Then they'll want to use you. Ms. Reynolds exhaled sharply. And if you fail? Malcolm didn't answer. They all knew what that meant. His mother's grip tightened. Malcolm, please. He turned to her, his eyes softening. Mom, I promise I'm not being reckless. She blinked away tears. You're walking into a building full of killers. Malcolm swallowed the lump in his throat. I have to. Cole sighed. Fine, but you're not going alone. Malcolm turned to him. You have an idea? Cole grinned. Kid, I always have ideas. An hour later, the abandoned bank. The night was eerily quiet. The air smelled of rust and damp concrete. The old bank loomed ahead, its shattered windows casting jagged reflections of the city lights. Malcolm stepped forward, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of Cole's words in his earpiece. Stick to the plan, kid. Malcolm took a deep breath. He wasn't walking in alone. Not really. Cole was watching from a rooftop a block away, his sniper rifle trained on the entrance. Ms. Reynolds was parked in a van around the corner, ready to intercept police radio chatter. And Malcolm? He had a hidden camera in his shirt button, transmitting everything live. If things went bad, the world would see it. He stepped inside. The air was cold. The flickering emergency lights barely illuminated the lobby. And then, a slow clap echoed through the room. Malcolm's stomach clenched. A man stepped forward. Tall, well-dressed, his face still hidden in shadow. Impressive, the man said, his voice smooth. I was beginning to wonder if you'd actually come. Malcolm kept his face blank. I don't like being summoned. The man chuckled. Oh, I think you do. You like the game, don't you? Malcolm didn't answer. The man stepped closer. Finally, the light caught his face. And Malcolm's breath hitched. He recognized him. James Winston, one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. A man with no criminal record. No scandals. But Malcolm had seen his name in Fisk's files. A silent investor in Fisk's empire. And now he was here. Malcolm forced himself to stay calm. You went through a lot of trouble to meet me. Winston smiled. Of course. A 13-year-old who could take down Raymond Fisk? That's rare. His smile widened. And I like rare things. Malcolm's stomach churned. Winston gestured to the side. The lead detective was there, still tied up, barely conscious, a knife pressed to his throat. Winston's voice was pleasant. I'm going to make this simple, Malcolm. He took a step forward. You work for me now. Malcolm's pulse spiked. The room felt smaller. Trapped. Winston tilted his head. You have a choice. Join me or watch him die. Malcolm's breath came in sharp. His mind raced. He couldn't show fear, couldn't hesitate. So he did the one thing Winston didn't expect. He laughed. A small chuckle, then a full grin. Winston's smirk faded. Something funny? Malcolm tilted his head. Yeah. He met Winston's eyes. You think you have control here? Winston's expression darkened. Excuse me? Malcolm's grin widened. Then, his voice turned ice cold. You're already caught. Silence. Winston blinked. What? Malcolm took a slow step forward. You think you're testing me? Watching how I react. His voice was calm. Dangerous. You didn't even check your own security first? Winston's jaw tensed. Malcolm smirked. You're live. Winston's face froze. Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. A video played. A live feed, broadcasting Winston's face. His voice. His threats. For the whole city to see. Winston's eye twitched. Malcolm smiled. You lose. Then, the front doors burst open. Floodlights. Police. SWAT. Malcolm stepped back as Winston's world collapsed. His men panicked. Cole's voice rang in Malcolm's ear. That's checkmate, kid. Winston turned to Malcolm, his face cold, his eyes burning. Then, a whisper. This isn't over. Malcolm's grin never wavered. It is for you. The flashing red and blue lights painted the abandoned bank in streaks of chaos. Officers poured in, their weapons raised, voices sharp as they ordered Winston's men to the ground. Malcolm stood still in the middle of it all. His breath was shallow, his hands clenched into fists. It was over. Winston was surrounded, his expression unreadable. He didn't struggle. He didn't run. He simply straightened his jacket, as if brushing off the dust of an inconvenience. Two officers grabbed his arms, pulling them behind his back. Click! The sound of handcuffs snapping shut. The moment Winston had lost. And yet, he was smiling. A slow, knowing smile. Malcolm's stomach twisted. Cole approached from behind, lowering his gun. His voice was quiet but firm. It's done, kid. Malcolm's eyes stayed locked on Winston. Is it? Because something felt wrong. The way Winston wasn't panicking. The way he wasn't fighting. Like he wanted to be arrested. Malcolm's hands clenched tighter. Cole, something's... Winston's voice cut through the noise. Smart kid. Malcolm's breath hitched. Winston turned his head slightly, just enough to look Malcolm in the eye. His voice was smooth. Confident. You think this is a win? Cole scoffed. You're done, Winston. Winston chuckled. Am I? His gaze locked onto Malcolm's. You still don't see it, do you? Malcolm's pulse spiked. Winston leaned forward slightly, his voice just above a whisper. You took out Fisk. His lips curled into something almost amused. But Fisk was never the top. Malcolm's stomach dropped. Fisk worked for me, Winston continued. But I work for someone else? Cold fear crept into Malcolm's chest. Winston smirked. You think I'm powerful? He chuckled darkly. I'm nothing but a pawn. The words sent ice through Malcolm's veins. Cole's grip on his gun tightened. You're bluffing. Winston chuckled again. Am I? Malcolm felt it now. That deep, gut-wrenching realization. That even though he had played the perfect game, even though he had won this battle, the real war was just beginning. His voice was barely a whisper. Who's above you? Winston's smile widened. And then, he leaned in and whispered a single name. One Malcolm recognized. One that sent his entire world crashing down. His breath caught. His knees almost buckled. Cole's brows furrowed. Who? What did he say? Malcolm didn't answer. Because he knew that name. He trusted that name. His blood turned to ice. Winston leaned back, satisfied. Now you see, he murmured. Malcolm forced himself to breathe. Forced himself to think. And then, his phone buzzed. A new message. No name. No number. Just 3 words. See you soon. Malcolm's breath shook. His mother rushed to his side. "Malcolm, what is it?" He didn't answer, because for the first time since this all began, he realized the truth. Fisk was just the beginning. Winston was just a piece. And now Malcolm had caught the attention of something much bigger. Someone much worse. And they were watching him, waiting, planning. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had won the battle. But the war? The war had just begun.